What's going on, everybody? It's Eric here, and what you see on the screen right now above me is an actual Mac that I'm using for this demonstration. We're going to be going through actual VirtualBox installation and using two VMs, Rocky Linux and Ubuntu, separately due to resources. And the reason I bring up resources is why I have this on the screen right now. The actual information, the amount inside of our General tab for settings inside the Mac. And I want to show that we're using a Mac from 2019 for this demonstration, and we have a 2.6 gigahertz 6-core processor. We also have 16 gigs of RAM available on this particular system. Now, the reason I bring this up is because whenever we do virtual machine installation and running, we have to make sure that our physical resources are available for that virtual machine. So, for instance, with 6 cores of processor on this particular Mac, we would run a virtual machine at equal or 5 or less, because we need at least that 1 core available for the host itself. And when I say the host itself, I'm talking about the actual Mac that we're using here on screen. And so we would be running VMs on top of this actual host. Now, I do want to clarify, when I say VMs, I'm talking about virtual machines. We're going to be using VirtualBox mostly because it's free and it's easier to use as a demonstration, and it's aligned with our courses here at Panola. Now, I'm also pointing out, too, that there is another solution out there called Virtual Machine, VMware, and that is a pay-to-play type solution. And if that's the route you want to go, by all means. The theory and practice of what we're doing here for VirtualBox is pretty close to the same idea that's going on inside a virtual machine for VMware. Now, same for memory. We have 16 gigs. We want to make sure that we leave some RAM running for the actual host itself. So if we allocate a virtual machine at 16 gigs of RAM, it might peter out because there's nothing available for it from the actual host itself. So in our case, since we're going to be running different versions of Linux, Rocky and Ubuntu, through this demonstration, we're going to be making sure that they run at about 4 gigs of RAM, and we'll get more into that shortly. Now, the last thing I want to show you for resources is the actual disk utility. And the way I got there is I went to the actual Finder, the Launchpad, and I just started typing in disk, and you'll see disk utility right there. And inside of our disk utility, you will see that we have a Macintosh HD volume with 34 gigs of free hard drive space. So if you allocate a virtual machine on this particular system at more than 34 gigs of free space, you will have a problem running it because it's more than what the actual virtual machine or physical host can actually tolerate. So whenever we do this, we'll probably be installing at the bare minimum because resources are limited. Now, once you start getting into that virtual environment that has ESXi and the VMware side of the house, or something like Azure in the Microsoft world for the cloud type stuff, resources are pay to play, and it's based on the physical limitations to how many VMs you could run in that one environment. All right, so all that being said, we're going to close out our about, and you'll see on the desktop that I have a folder called VMs. I have it highlighted up there. You can see it. It's the purple one on the right side. And I also have here a window open for terminal. Now, inside of terminal, we can see that we are in our actual home directory. This is my wife's laptop, by the way. I just want to point that out. That's why it says Valerie up top. And you can see that I already did a ls-la to show a directory listing. Now we're going to go inside of the actual desktop folder. So give me just a second here. And we're going to start typing cd space desktop. Now remember, any POSIX-based system, even Mac, is case sensitive. So that first D in desktop has to be capitalized. Now, once we get in that folder, we can do another ls-la, and we can see that it would like access to your folder. Okay, so we're going to click OK, give it access. I'm going to expand this a little bit so we can see an actual full-on display of what's going on here. And you can see as we start getting down to the bottom, I'm going to highlight it for you, the VMs folder right there. Now, if you've been keeping up inside of the Linux courses, you'll notice that at the beginning of it, it has a D, R, WX, R, blank X, R, blank X. The first D at the beginning indicates that this is a directory, and it's broken down by 3 groups. RWX in the first part indicates that the owner and system has read, write, and execute permissions for this particular folder. and other people in the two separate groups for other users and everyone only have read and execute permissions. Those can be changed with the chown or the chmod commands, but we're not going to be getting into that. What we're going to do is we're going to type cd space v or capital VM, do a tab so we can get the full name of the folder in there with the slash on the end of it. Hit enter and do a ls-la, and you will see that there's nothing in there. And the reason I'm doing this is to show you that there's nothing up my sleeves, because we're going to be doing this from the very beginning. Now, that being said, I'm already have open a web page for us, which is the Oracle VirtualBox web page, where we can select our different downloads. And we're going to be using the Mac OS link, and you can see that it already started to download right there. Now, this is going to take just a second, so I'm going to pause while this downloads, and then when it does complete, I'm going to open the folder and we'll execute. All right, so our download has completed, and I just went to show downloads, or you could just hover over it and click the little folder icon to open up the actual downloads folder, or wherever these are being stored at. Now, you'll see here that I have highlighted up at the very top. There we go. I have VirtualBox 7.0.10 Alpha with a DMG on it. Now, I'm going to double click on that. There it goes. And you can see that the VirtualBox folder DMG is kind of an executable package inside of POSIX-based systems, depending on which one you're using. Because if you're using a Ubuntu or a Debian-based system, it may end with RPM for that particular machine. But what we're looking at is the DMG file inside of Mac itself. You'll see here that we have different icons to do, and it's easy step by step. Double click this icon for the actual VirtualBox package, and you'll see that the installation opens up for us. Now, we're going to click continue because we're going to go ahead and do this install. But if you wanted to change locations of the actual installation, this would be where you would do it right now for the change install location. We're going to go ahead and click install. Give me a second. I'm going to type in the actual password to make sure that we have admin rights on this particular system. And it's going to go ahead and start writing the files for our particular installation of VirtualBox. Now, this is going to take just a second, and hopefully I don't have to do a hard cut here. You can see on the top right where it says VirtualBox has been added to the items that can run in the background. You can manage this in the login items setup, and it has installed successfully. So we're going to go ahead and click close on that. And I personally am going to keep this because I don't want to mess up anything as far as the installation files go. And now we're going to go to step number 2, which is run the VirtualBox application from the applications folder. And it gives us a link to the applications folder. Now, inside of here, I'm going to sort by date modified. And you can see up at the top that we have VirtualBox. Now, at this point, you can drag and create a link on the desktop. And I'm going to minimize these and show you where that link is, because there's a lot going on this desktop, and I apologize for that. You see it right here. I have it highlighted on the right over there, and I'm going to go ahead and double click that. And while it's loading, there we go. This is our first time of using VirtualBox. Now, right there, VirtualBox is installed for a Mac. No problem whatsoever. But we're going to take a look at some of the tools real quick and get an understanding of what's going on. The first one is actual network. Now, inside of our network, we can see that we don't have many things here yet, but what we're taking a look at right now is the actual properties. I'm clicking on it right now. And we're going to select NAT networks. Now, these are our general options. It's set by default. If you click on cloud networks, it's the same thing as well. That's okay. At this point, we're going to create a network under our NAT networks, and it was just created there. So what happens now is that any virtual machine that we have in the future that's created on this host, you'll see on the left side here, but those virtual machines are allowed to run and use the actual physical host to be able to reach out and touch the internet. NAT stands for Network Address Translation. So the one IP address that we have here, let me go to our terminal real quick and show you by typing in ifconfig. One word. Now, there's a lot of different NICs here. What we're taking a look at, if we scroll up, is the EN0. Right there, we have an IP address of 192.168.0.5. That's the host. So now our internal network here for virtual machines will have an IP address of 10.0.2. 1 through 255 since it's a 24-bit subnet mask. 24 bits indicates it'll be a subnet mask of 255.255.255.0, and for those in the networking class, we should be there already. Now, all that being said, we're going to go back over to our web browser. Oops, wrong one. Sorry. I'm going to right-click and go to Downloads. There we go. And I'm going to move over to the next tab, and we can see here that we are on the Rocky Linux page, rockylinux.org. And we're going to download. I know the colors aren't great here on this page for whatever reason. I'm looking over at the screen where I'm screencasting to on OBS. We're going to click on the Download 9.2 icon. Now you'll notice that there are a few different options here. And what we're taking a look at is the architecture type. And we're going to be running, based on our architecture, what this system will actually support. So to play it safe, we're going to select the architecture of x86_64. I know that's kind of hard to see. It's right above me here, but it's the first option under Rocky 9. And we're going to go with we'll go with the minimal because the limited hard drive space. Now we're going to go ahead and start downloading this, and it's going to take a minute because it's 1.5 gigs. And when this downloads, we need to remember that it's in an ISO. And that'll make more sense once we actually start getting inside of VirtualBox to assign that ISO to create a virtual machine. So I'm going to hard cut here while this downloads, and we'll be right back. Okay, well, after that long wait, I know it didn't seem long on here, but we have it downloaded finally. We're going to click on the folder icon again to see where that's at. Now, at this point, I'm going to move it because it's currently in the downloads folder, and I'm going to... let's see, move. Can we do that here on the actual Mac? So now I'm going to copy it first. Then I'm going to go to my folder for the VMs. And that should be here on the desktop. Let me start moving things out of the way for us here real quick. Minimize that. I'm going to go here, minimize that, and open up my VM folders. And I'm going to right click and go to paste item. And then I want to delete it out of the actual downloads so I can keep space cleared up on this machine since I'm a little bit limited on hard drive space as we speak. I'm going to move those two items to trash, and then I'm going to download that. All right, so now right now we're just going to leave that ISO there, and we're going to go back over to our VirtualBox for a second. At this point, we're going to click on Create, and we're going to start by creating a new virtual machine. So it may take a second to load. Oh, sorry. This is actually creating the network. So let me delete those real quick. My bad. We're going to go to Tools and go back to our Welcome screen. There we go. And we're going to click on New for a new virtual machine. Now, at this point, we're going to call it Rocky for its name. And then we're going to change the folder because we already have a folder dedicated to it. So we'll go to Other. And we're going to say, okay, for allowing just to access everywhere. Now, I need to move this over so we can see where everything's actually is. We're going to select Desktop and the VMs folder. So right there, Users, Valerie, Desktop, VMs. That's where we're going to put everything. And then we're going to select our ISO image. Now, we're going to hit down and go to Other. And we're going to select that same VM folder. And we're going to select the Rocky ISO. Now I'm going to do one more thing real quick. I'm going to go back to my folder. I'm going to go to Other, and I'm going to say New Folder. So I have a subfolder inside of my VM folder for the actual virtual machine itself. So I'm not overwhelmed with a lot of files. And so I'm going to select Rocky. I just created a new folder called Rocky. Now I'm going to go back to my folder here real quick on the desktop and show you what I'm talking about. So my ISO reference is right there, and everything concerning the VM will be in the subfolder called Rocky. So back over on our VirtualBox, we have all the basics selected. And you can see here, you might have to zoom in a little bit, and I apologize. It already detected the type of Linux, and the version is Red Hat 64. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean this is going to be Red Hat. It just means that this is something close to Red Hat, so VirtualBox can kind of go through it. We're not going to do expert mode. We're just going to do the basics here. We're going to click Next, and we're going to leave for username. It's an unintended install. Let me go back and make sure we can do we'll skip the unintended install because I want to go through and go over a couple things with you. So we're going to click next, and this is what I was talking about because we want to make sure our base memory settings, our RAM, is allocated correctly. Now by default here, it allocated 2 gigs of RAM for the actual OS itself, and for the processor allocated 1 CPU. Now if we go back over to our system settings and go to general and go to about, we see here we're reminded that we are at 6 cores. So allocating 1 to that Rocky VM is going to reduce that to 5 for the actual host. And the same thing goes for the RAM. Since we have 16 gigs of RAM, we're allocating 2 gigs of it to the VM. That means that our host system will only have 14 gigs of RAM to play with after this VM is started up. Now, while the VM is shut down, it's not being used. So that means all those resources are going back to the host. But every time it's on, those resources are allocated. So we're going to click next. We're not going to worry about the enable EFI. Don't worry about that. We're just clicking next. And now we're going to select our hard drive size. Now for this one, we're going to select the default of 20 gigs. And we know that's acceptable because we have about 32 gigs free on this hard drive. So now once this is created, you have 2 options here. You can see there's a checkbox right here called pre-allocate full size. If you do that, what will happen is it'll create a virtual hard drive that is 20 gigs big. And there may not be a lot of data in that 20 gigs because the OS may not fill it up and the files, etc. and stuff like that. But it's just making sure that it already has that 20 gigs dedicated just for it. If you don't click that, it's only going to be as big as what the file or data that you have in it. So once you install the operating system, you have it running, you have some other files on there, it may only be 5 gigs. But it can only be as big as 20 because that's what's being set here. So it will never go over 20 gigs. We're going to leave it unchecked so that way we can save as much hard drive space on this physical host as possible. And again, this is just a default installation. We can go over some of the finer settings later because they get more in detail, but we are going as a new install. We're going to click next, and we have a summary here of everything that we've selected and gone through already. We've covered this while we were doing it, so we're going to hit finish. Now, if you see on the left, you can see that the Rocky VM is turned off, and that's just because all we did was create the placeholder for it and all the backup files. By backup files, let's go to the file folder here for a second, show you what I'm talking about. On the VMs, we can see that we have Rocky here. I'm going to expand that, and you can see that there are different folders and files and stuff like that in there. This right here, the VDI, Rocky.VDI, is the actual hard drive of the virtual machine. And you can see here right now, it's only 2.1 megs. As we start the install and power this virtual machine up, it's going to expand, and that's why I'm leaving it open. Now, this virtual machine is not installed yet. All we did was create a placeholder inside a VirtualBox for it, and we've mounted the ISO to it. The ISO can be thought of as a CD or DVD. So if you have a brand new computer from whatever store you bought it from and there's no operating system on there, you would have it boot from a disk to start the install of the operating system. And that's exactly what's going on here. So if we expand our options for the Rocky VM that we've created, we can go into details. And details are on the right here. And you can see that if we scroll down, we can go to storage, and you can see that IDE secondary device optical drive, which means simulating a CD or DVD drive, is pointed to that ISO file for the actual Rocky operating system. Now at this point, we're going to right click and go to start and go into a normal start. And you'll see a screen pop up here, and it says VirtualBox would like to receive keystrokes, open system settings. We're going to allow the keystrokes to happen because we do need to be able to do that. So we're just going to click OK. I'm going to use the password as administrator to allow this. And I'm going to do it again because I just lost my place. Now the reason we're doing this is because if we didn't, we wouldn't be able to send any of the keystrokes, and VirtualBox will not be able to open monitor input from this keyboard until it's quit. You can choose to quit VirtualBox now or do it later on your own. We're going to do it later on our own. But if we didn't do this input monitoring right here, then VirtualBox would not be able to receive any key input. Would like to control this computer using accessibility features. And we may have to do this a couple of times based on the security settings that we have on our Mac. we're going to select it for VirtualBox. As you can see, I already have it open and allowed for OBS, which is what we're using now. We're going to use our password again for admin rights. Good, good, good. And we're going to close that. And you can see that we're getting updates and everything like that of what's actually going on. And this is our virtual machine. Now, at this point, you have a couple of options. You can make this full screen like that, but once it's pretty much in this mode until the actual operating system starts. Now, what it's doing is going through its actual startup, and the BIOS for this virtual machine says read from the ISO or the CD-ROM first. And so that's what it's doing. So it's starting the installer one moment, and we're actually going through the install of Rocky Linux. So I'm not going to do any hard cuts here, but you will see me sneak in a little bit of coffee while this is actually installing, because I want to make sure that we don't miss anything while this setup is continuing. Now you can see here that we're at the actual selection, input selection for Rocky Linux. I just clicked inside of the virtual machine, and it says you have clicked the mouse inside the virtual machine display or press the hotkey. Do we want to allow this to capture? And I'm going to say don't show this again and capture, so that way we can actually put the mouse inside of the virtual machine as well. Now, I don't know about you, but the only language I can kind of speak is English, and I need the keyboard to be in English as well. So I'm going to hit continue. And now here we have other options. So we need to select the installation destination. And you can see here the very familiar 20 gig hard drive. That's the virtual hard drive file that we allocated inside of VirtualBox itself. And we're going to select that. No disk selected. Please select at least one disk to install. Okay, we've got to make sure the check mark is there, and then scroll down to make sure we have everything. Yep, storage configuration automatic. That's all. We're just going to leave those as default. We're going to click done, and you'll see that that has been configured. Now we also need to go down a little bit, and you'll see here that one of the user settings needed to be set is root password. And this is the actual admin account inside of the Linux system itself for Rocky. And this is often referred to as root, or whatever you rename it. Like in Windows, this would be the administrator account. So for our root password, we're going to say P at $, capital P at $, capital W O R D. Capital P at $, capital W O R D. Now it does say weak, but I'm leaving it there. Password fails the dictionary check. It is based on dictionary word. You will have to press done twice to confirm. Just letting you know that it is a default password that has been cracked. And as you go through our courses here at Panola, you will start getting practice on how to crack those default passwords or dictionary passwords. So we're going to hit done twice. Boom, there we go. And you can see on the bottom right that our begin installation icon has turned blue. That means that we've set up just the basics, just enough to be able to install Rocky Linux in our virtual environment. We're going to hit begin installation, and it's going to go through its installation process. Now, this is very similar to Windows when it's just taking the files from the disk and putting them on the actual hard drive itself. Now, it's also downloading packages. Now, why is that possible? Well, because we created a network that's NATed for our virtual systems from the host itself. So already this picks up a DHCP address from VirtualBox, translates it through the actual Mac host itself, and is able to go out to the World Wide Web to download whatever it needs. Now this can be tightened up later on when we go through advanced details for it, but for now we're just taking a look at some of the things that are basic for the installation itself. Now for this part right here, I am going to do a hard cut because I don't have enough words to fill in the gaps and bore you while this is happening. So I'll be right back. Okay, so the installation actually went through and completed. You can see that it went complete right here. We're actually going to click reboot system. Now, when we do this, we need to remember that this is not necessarily the host system. It's not the Mac. So everything you see down there, yep, down there will still be there. We're rebooting the actual virtual machine itself. So we're going to hit reboot system, and you'll see here in just a second, there it goes, that the system has rebooted. Now at this point, we need to remember command to control to release the mouse from the system. There we go. I used Command and Control on the left side of the keyboard to release the mouse. And we also need to, virtual machine is yeah, I want to switch it to full screen mode. There's full screen mode. You can always move your mouse up to the top to get it out of full screen mode, like that right there. I'm just going to double click to minimize it here for a second. I'm going to go back over to the virtual machine settings. Now, the reason I'm doing this is because I want to unmount the ISO. So the next time that this machine boots up, it doesn't think that we're trying to reinstall. So to do that, let me back up for a second. I hit the settings icon when I have Rocky selected. I go over to storage icon, and I can, it already took it out automatically, which is great. So it did an auto eject, but this is where you would go to make sure that that ISO has been ejected. And then if you wanted to attach a CD to it later, you can very easily just come over here and click the disk icon, choose a disk file, choose a create a virtual disk option, or more recent, you can attach the Rocky ISO disk to it. So that is just a couple options for you to remember. We're going to go back over here to our Rocky OS. We're going to type in root as our login, and we're going to type in our capital P @ capital W O R D. And there we are in the actual local host root. We are actually in the operating system itself. And we could test this by doing a ls-la. You can see there that we are actually inside of the actual operating system directory system. And we're at the bash, which is the # for the actual operating system inside a terminal. All right, now, so you're probably wondering, where's the GUI or the graphical user interface that makes everything easier, like here on the Mac that you can see with all the buttons and everything like that. No hate, just pointing it out. So I'm going to move my, control my mouse here for a second. I'm going to close this window. And what we did was we did a minimal install to keep the size of the ISO down. And I did that as not only to keep the size down, but also to show that this operating system, sorry, I had a little brain fart there, is actually on the internet. And I can prove that by typing in ifconfig, one word. Oop, not found. So we need to install more than just the baseline minimum. Now, in order to do that, we need to go through and do a couple of checks. First, we're going to type sudo so we can make sure that we're running whatever it is we're running inside of, in admin mode inside the operating system. And we're going to type in dnf group list -- installed. This shows us what's actually running and installed on the actual operating system itself. You can see it's doing an actual check on the base OS, the app stream, and everything like that. And what we're doing is kind of getting an idea of what operating system was installed. Now, while that's doing that, I'm going to free the mouse up again with the left control and command, open up the download Rocky Linux page, and I want to point out just a couple things here real quick. When we did the Rocky Linux download from rockylinux.org, we selected up there we go, the minimal. I'm going to highlight that for a second. We selected minimal. Now, if we wanted to do the entire operating system in one whack, it would be the exact same installation process. We would just move one over to go to DVD. And that's the full operating system plus the ISO. If we come back over here, we can see that in the middle of it, it says minimal installed. Well, that just means that that's the only thing that's installed. So now what we're going to do is I'm going to cheat and hit the up arrow. And I'm going to retype this command. Instead of installed, I'm going to type in available, if I can spell available. Now, when we run this, we can see that we have the minimal installed, but these are the different things that we do have available to us. And you'll notice that one of them says server with GUI. Now we're going to also look at the actual workstation itself because we don't necessarily need this to be a server. We don't have that many resources. So we're going to install the actual workstation. Now for this command, we're going to type in sudo dnf group install quotation mark capital W workstation. Make sure I spelled that right, close quotation marks, and we're going to hit enter. Now all this came up, and what it's doing is it's telling us that everything that's going to be installed with it. Total download size is 998 megs. Are we okay with this? I'm going to hit yes because I know that I have enough size or space on here to do that. And you can see it's actually downloading it. And the ISO is disconnected, nothing up my sleeves. In the background, it actually used the NAT from our VirtualBox environment to start downloading everything from the web to make this a full-on workstation. Now you can see that there are 921 different things it needs to download, and it's at 6% right now. So I'm going to let this continue and pause my recording so that way I don't bore you for the entire GUI installation of what's going on here. Be right back. All right, so we're back. We already went through the entire install. Now what it's asking us for now is this is everything that it downloaded. Are we sure we want to install it? This is where it came from. Just basically, are you okay? We got everything. Are you okay with it? We're going to hit Y for yes, and we're going to key imported successfully. So it said, yeah, we figured it out. And now it's going to do the actual install of all of those RPMs that you see above, all 921 of them. Now, I'm going to pause here for a second after it starts so that way we can see what it looks like. It's running its checks on the files themselves. So what it did was it downloaded them, verified that it was the same file on here than it was the actual site. And that's done by hashing, more commonly with a checksum. And we covered this in the security courses here at Panola. And this is just some of the things to consider. Now you can see that it's installing all 957 because it actually increased the number. And this is going to take a little bit. So I'm going to pause the actual recording and come back when that's completed. Be right back. All right, so everything installed successfully. We can see that with the complete and back to our prompt. Now we're going to do one more of these. We're going to type in sudo dnf group install open quotation marks server with GUI, GUI, close quotation marks. Now the reason we're doing this, now I know a while ago we said we're not making this a server, but we are making it a server with GUI. Basically, we're installing the graphical user interface, and the workstation part of it was just making sure that we had the background for it with all the tools and everything. So we're going to hit enter on this, and it's going to say that our download install size is 157 megs, and our total download is going to be 38 megs. Now I'll show you once all this is done where this affects the actual virtual hard drive in our actual file system. But for now, we're going to hit yes, and it's going to start the download. Now, just like before, you can see there's 25 of them. Depending on how long this takes, I'm actually going to pause here and let this complete. Be right back. All right, so everything downloaded, installed successfully. We can see complete on the bottom and back to our prompt, but we're not quite done yet. We got a couple of more steps to go before we can reboot the system. And the first thing we're going to do is type in sudo. And it's a habit for me just typing in sudo to make sure that we're running at elevated privileges whenever I type in a command. And we're going to type in cys TEM for system, and then CTL, one word, and then space get space default, DEFAULT. Now we can see here that it says multi-user.target. And the reason that is that by default, this system is supposed to boot up into this command line prompt or terminal. We're going to be changing that to the actual graphical. And to do that, we're going to type in sudo systemctl set dash default, DEFAULT space graphical. Make sure I spelled that right. We're going to hit enter, and we can see that it removed the default target and reset it as the graphical.target. Now, if I hit up a couple of times and go to get default, we can see that we have the graphical.target. Now, at this point, we need to actually reboot the system in order to get it to show us that default login or graphical interface. And to do that, we simply type reboot. And you can see that the system immediately went into rebooting. And right here, I'm going to move it so the time doesn't hit real quick. We can see that our default option for grub is grub is more like the master boot record here on the hard drive of which system you want to boot into. And we're going to go with the default. But if you have more than one operating system installed on this virtual hard drive, you would see those options here. But we're just going to leave it at one. We're going to select the default, and it's going to start its boot sequence into the graphical user interface. Now it's going to take just a second because it's still going through doing its checks and everything, starting services, making sure that everything's good. And you can see here that once it does that, oh, what's it asking us? Would like to access your microphone. I'm not going to allow that because there's no reason for it in this one, but if you were to use it and wanted to do that, by all means. And you can see here that, boom, we're actually in the graphical setup for, or interface for the Rocky Linux 9.2 operating system. And we're going to select, put my mouse in and go to Start Setup. We're going to turn our location services off. That's just habit for myself. Go to Next. We're going to skip the Create Online Account. And for this, I'm just going to say Eric is my username, and I'm going to click Next. And my password is going to be the same, capital P @ $, capital WORD. I'm going to do the same on the bottom. And it says week. Let me add a 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'm going to hit Next. All done. So let's start using Rocky Linux. Make sure I'm still recording so I didn't skip anything. But that is the graphical user interface, and basically from cradle to grave, how we start up the installation of VirtualBox and put on a operating system inside of VirtualBox, this one in particular, Rocky Linux, on our Mac operating systems. Now, we're not going to take a tour. We're just going to leave that there. And there's more to do. This is just a regular operating system inside of our virtual machine environment. Now, I do want to show you one last thing before we cut this one short. I'm going to hit, get my mouse out real quick. There we go. I'm going to move this over, and I'm going to minimize everything real quick. And minimize again. There we go. We're in our virtual machines folder. Now, at this point, you can see that our rocky.vdi, the actual hard drive file for the virtual system, virtual machine, has expanded. We're almost at 6.6 gigs. And if you remember, we were just in the megabytes when this started. So that means that that hard drive is going to keep expanding until it's completely full at 20 gigabytes based on what we put inside the settings of VirtualBox. Now, that's it for this one. I'm going to go ahead and shut this one down because in the next video, we're going to be installing, download and installing Ubuntu inside of our VirtualBox environment. Y'all take care. Check out the other courses here at panola.edu and take a look at the cybersecurity program, networking, or intro to digital forensics. I'm Eric. Y'all take care.